I stared at the laptop screen, blinking in disbelief, as if from too bright a light or a sudden flash of pain, which, without having a physical form, nevertheless turned out to be so palpable that it reverberated somewhere between my temples, swept down my back with a slight tremor and stopped in my chest with a heavy weight. In my mailbox, dusty from time to time and practically forgotten like an old school album, there was a letter from my parents, sent to an address that I had hardly checked since I graduated from high school and left, as it seemed to me then, forever, leaving everything that once bore the name family in the past, as something that I no longer wanted to deal with. And before we continue, write in the comments from which city you are watching this video. Enjoy watching. It was my old school email, the one through which, in the last years of my studies, I received exam schedules, notifications from teachers, and rare but warm messages from my only friend, who, alas, was not destined to stay in my life for long. It's been 10 years since I last communicated with any of them, from those who signed up mom and dad, from those who called themselves family, but who always kept me at arm's length, as if I was something unsuitable, something that they just didn't work out. Dear Nicolette, the letter began, and this tone, pompously neutral, with strained tenderness, already foreshadowed something in their spirit. We are writing to inform you that in 2 weeks there will be a family meeting at your brother's newly purchased house. All your closest relatives will be there, and we think you should come too. There was no warmth, no remorse, or even a faint attempt to explain the 10-year silence, just dry information and an almost commanding tone, as if nothing had happened over the years, as if I hadn't been thrown overboard their beautiful, shiny boat called the family. At the bottom was my brother Michel's address. I snorted. It's the right thing to do. Classic mom and dad, restrained, correct, cold, like porcelain figurines, frozen in an eternal family photo. I closed my laptop, as if I'd slammed the lid of a box of long-forgotten letters, and slowly walked over to the window of my office, which, paradoxical as it may sound, was a much bigger home for me than my parents' nest had ever been. The windows of the office looked out over the city, at its endlessly moving lines of lights, cars, and shadows, which intertwine into something resembling breathing, noisy, bustling, but alive. The headquarters of the restaurant empire, which I helped build from scratch, was located on the 20th floor of this glass giant, a symbol of my perseverance and rebellion, my refusal to be who I once wanted to be. This place, high above the streets and too far from the world where I was born, has become my fortress, my answer to everything I've ever heard. Why can't you be like Michelle? I thought about all this throughout the day, going back over and over to those lines, to that faceless and polite invitation, to those 2 weeks, which seemed to be counted not from a calendar, but from an internal alarm timer. And yet, to my surprise, I decided to answer, I'll be there. That's all I wrote, briefly, without embellishments, without the slightest hint that this decision was difficult for me. Then I leaned back in my chair, feeling the memories begin to roll in like a rising wave, ready to crash. I've always been the odd one out in my family. Michelle was a golden child, a blonde-haired angel, eternally smiling, witty, confident, with that easy charisma that makes people reach out to him like the sun, forgetting about the shadows he casts. Everyone adored him, the aunts and uncles who worshipped the ground he walked on, the grandparents who pampered him to the point of losing his sanity, even our disgustingly perfect mom and dad, who seemed ready to build him a shrine right in the living room if it would make him happy. And I was just Nicolette the mouse, quiet, shy, awkward, always in the shadows, with a book in my hands and thoughts that no one wanted to listen to. Why can't you be more like your brother? Mom asked, looking at me with a slight reproach, when I once again hid in corners during noisy family gatherings, trying to become invisible, disappear into the wallpaper so that no one would touch, look, or remember. These gatherings were a real torture for me, a ritual of pain and humiliation. Michel, as always, was the center of attention, playing his guitar, singing, making everyone clap and admire. And I found the most secluded place and counted the minutes, seconds, and moments before I could leave, disappear, and disappear. That's the black sheep, Aunt Linda whispered, thinking I couldn't hear. What a strange girl, Uncle Pino replied, shaking his head. My cousins were no better. They excluded me from the games, pointedly ignored me, and sometimes even mocked me, as if I were some kind of misunderstanding. "We don't need Nicolette, she's boring," Rico said. "She never talks at all," Bella echoed. I retreated to a corner with a book, trying to pretend that I didn't care, but something alive and thin was tearing inside, like a spider's web in the rain. When Michelle graduated from high school, the whole extended family, as if they had received a collective revelation, enthusiastically and unanimously chipped in to pay for his college tuition, as if this was not just the next stage in their pet's life, but the most important investment in a bright and necessarily great future, which, for some reason, they were all convinced, it certainly had to start with him, because Michelle had all the makings of a real man: confidence, charm, correct facial features, and the very ease in communication, which, as they said, I, to their deepest regret, was completely deprived of. For several months, all family communication, rare phone calls, mass dinners, even holiday greetings, revolved exclusively around this event. Michelle enrolled at a state university. "Isn't that wonderful? We are all so proud of him," the adults repeated with delight, as if they wanted to infect me, but which only responded to me with a quiet, painful ringing inside. "In 2 years, he would accomplish great things," they said, as if repeating a prophecy, and I heard it so often that the words lost their meaning, became like an annoying mantra that I wanted to shut up in my palms. When it was my turn to graduate, Mom and Dad, with the same expression on their faces with which they once informed me that my beloved cat had been taken to a better place, set me down at the kitchen table. Dad began cautiously, as if apologizing in advance for saying, "Nicoletta, we don't have money for your college," and Mom, who was sitting with her arms folded and legs crossed, added in a colder tone, "All our savings went to Michelle's education. You need to find a job and support yourself." I wasn't surprised. I didn't flare up, cry, or make a scene. I just nodded, as if it was expected, but the next day it still hurt, deep and hollow, like an old bruise under my ribs that I couldn't get rid of. I got a job as a waitress at a local restaurant about a 10-minute walk from our house, and tried to convince myself that it was temporary, that I was just raising funds for my future, but every day spent in uniform, with a tray in my hands and a fake smile on my face, undermined my faith in it temporarily. How water erodes a stone. I thought it couldn't get any worse, but I was wrong. My cousin, Bella, always immaculately dressed, with that contemptuous half-squint in her eyes, began to appear regularly in the restaurant and sit at tables in my department. Rico came with her, and each of their visits turned into a farce. "Look at the loser, Nicolette," he said without lowering his voice. "It looks like that's all she's capable of." Bella giggled, rolling the glass in her fingers, and looked at me with the same expression with which people look at something that has failed. I'm sure she'll laugh like this for the rest of her life, especially after that particularly humiliating shift when someone left me a 5-cent tip and wrote on the receipt, "Can you help someone else?" That was the last straw. That evening, standing in the cramped locker room, pressing my forehead against the cool mirror, I felt something inside me break, not with a bang and tears, but quietly, silently, like a tree rotting from the inside. I told my parents that I was quitting and moving to the other side of the city. I found a job in another restaurant, further away, easier, poorer, but with different people, with a different atmosphere, where no one knew me. I said, "I'm going to rent an apartment with my colleagues." Mom actually smiled and said, "That's probably for the best." Dad nodded, as if he was even mildly pleased. "Honey, you're old enough to live on your own." 2 days later, I packed all my possessions into 3 cardboard boxes, which contained my life, compressed to a minimum, and carried like a weight on my shoulders. None of my parents helped me, and no one looked particularly upset when they saw me leave. Michelle went off to college. I assumed he was having a great time surrounded by new friends and the usual attention. When I left my childhood home, my mother called after me, "Don't forget to tell us your new address." I still haven't reported it. And they didn't ask anymore. The apartment I moved into was tiny, cramped, with peeling walls and creaking floorboards, and we shared it with 3 people, me, Daphne, and Monga, the same waitresses as me, with the same worn sneakers and the same tired eyes. Each of us paid a third of the rent, and it was barely enough to stay without food. The restaurant I got a job at was called Bella's, and it was run by a woman named Isabella Montanari, who was strict, elegant, with a voice that felt like marble, and a demeanor as if she had been born in the director's chair. It was a middle-class establishment with a decent menu and a steady stream of customers, but for me it was like a breath of fresh air, not because it was prestigious, but because it was as far away from my family as possible. I threw myself into work. I came early, stayed late, took extra shifts whenever possible. Yes, I needed money, but much more than that. I needed a direction, a goal, a point of focus that would help me not think about the gaping hole where love should have been. After 6 months at Bella's, I began to notice that Isabella was watching me, not with suspicion, but with that cold interest that people have when they are used to looking for diamonds among coal. One evening, when I was changing in the locker room, she came up to me and said, "Nicolette, come into my office." I followed her, my heart beating like in those school days when I was called to the principal. She motioned for him to sit down and said, "I'm impressed with your work ethic. You're the most reliable waiter I have." "Thank you," I muttered, not used to being praised. She leaned forward as if she was about to confide in me a secret. "I want to make you a head waitress. It's a raise of $150 and more responsibility." My eyes widened. "Really?" "I mean, yes, thank you." She nodded, smiling tightly. "There's something else. Have you ever thought about running a restaurant?" I shook my head. "There are courses at the community college. I think you have potential, Nicolette. I'm ready to adjust your schedule, if you're interested." For the first time in many years, I felt like someone believed in me. I would have liked to say that, but instead I just nodded. With my promotion and a slightly higher salary, I was able to move into my own tiny studio apartment. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. The holiday season was approaching, and despite the voice of reason, I called home. "Hi, Mom, this is Nicolette." "Oh, hi, honey," she replied absently. "How are you?" "I'm fine. I've been thinking about Christmas plans." "I thought maybe I could. We're at Aunt Rose's this year," she interrupted. "Michelle will be back from college. Everyone is happy to see him." "May I join you?" I asked, almost in a whisper. There was a pause. "Well, to be honest, Nicolette, no one has asked about you. I think it would be awkward if you showed up." I hung up the phone and cried all evening in my apartment, and then I wiped my tears and made a decision. I won't contact them anymore if they don't want me. The next day, Isabella noticed my red eyes, but she didn't say anything, just handed me a schedule for Christmas Eve and Christmas. "Double pay," she said. "I thought you might like it." I nodded gratefully. "I have nowhere else to go." "Their loss," she said simply. I went into work and study with renewed determination. The restaurant management courses opened my eyes to a world I never knew existed. I discovered that I have a head on my shoulders, the ability to count, organize, build processes, and, to my own surprise, a talent for leadership. By the time I turned 20, to my own surprise and quiet pride, which I hid even from myself, I took the position of CEO at Bella's, a small restaurant chain that began with one modest establishment that became a real home for me, where for the first time I felt what it means to be needed. Important, heard. I had my own office, albeit tiny, with thin walls and unreliable furniture, but still an office with a sign on the door, where for the first time my name stood not as someone's addition, not in someone's shadow, but as an independent achievement. My salary allowed me to move into a one-bedroom apartment, not just a room, not a studio, but a real apartment, where there was a bed with snow-white linens in the bedroom, and my photos hung on the wall, not random, not stolen from other people's albums, but mine, a symbol of the life I built myself. Then came the day that changed everything. Isabella, usually reserved, confident, and almost impenetrable, called me into her office, and as soon as I entered, I realized that something was wrong. There was anxiety in her eyes, a slight uncertainty, as if she was going to say something that would go beyond our usual business discussions. She said, "My aunt is dead." And before I could express my condolences, she added, "She left me some money, about $200,000. I said softly, "I'm sorry you lost someone close to you," but Isabella waved her hand, looking away. We weren't particularly close, to be honest. But now I have this money, and I do not know what to do with it. I waited, feeling her ponder her words, and then she continued, slowly, thoughtfully, "I was thinking about expanding. About the opening of the second place. Maybe even the third one. What do you think?" I didn't hesitate for a second. My whole body, my entire experience, every sleepless night and every difficult day spoke in unison. "That's a great idea." I said, "I can help you make a business plan. That's what I've been learning." And that same night, as soon as I returned home, I sat down at my laptop and did not sleep until 3 o'clock in the morning, rummaging through everything I had ever studied, all course materials, books, lectures, articles, to create not just a draft, but a clear, structured, professional business plan. It includes market analysis, financial forecasts, staffing needs, and exploration of potential locations. The next day, when I introduced him to Isabella, she flipped through a few pages, looked up at me and said softly, "This is a professional job, Nicolette." I shrugged, hiding a warm wave of satisfaction. "That's what you deserve." 6 months later, we opened a second restaurant, Bella's, on the other side of town, carefully choosing a location next to a busy street where crowds of people were looking for a place to dine every evening. 3 months later, a third restaurant opened in the center, closer to the business district, with a more refined interior and menu aimed at corporate customers. Both were successful from day one, and I knew that it wasn't just the location or the beautiful logo that mattered, but the way we calculated everything, how we built the processes, and how we preserved the reputation of the first establishment, which became the foundation of our new customers' trust. On my 26th birthday, Isabella invited me to dinner, not to one of our locations, not to our usual place, but to the nicest restaurant in the city, where the white tablecloths were starched to a crisp, and the candles on the tables burned with steady, warm light. After dessert, when the waiter quietly retreated with a tray, she took out an envelope. "Happy birthday, Nicolette," she said simply. Inside was a legal document in which I was named a partner, 30% of the shares in the Bella's restaurant group. I stared at her, speechless. She looked at me seriously. "You deserve it. I couldn't have done it without you. And to be honest, I'm tired. I want to spend more time with my family. You're young, ambitious, and you have a vision. I believe in you." I didn't know what to say. My heart was pounding like a drum in my chest, and all I could say was, "Yes." We both smiled. I said, "We're going to turn this into a restaurant empire." She laughed. "The restaurant empire. I like the sound of that." Over the next 4 years, we expanded to 12 branches across the state. I became the face of the company, participated in menu development, marketing strategies, held meetings with suppliers, supervised staff selection, personally trained new managers, and despite all the pressures, I felt alive, full of meaning and energy. Isabella joked that she was half retired at 52, but in fact she just stepped aside, entrusting me with the reins of government. The shy, awkward girl I once was gone completely and irrevocably, replaced by a confident, competent, successful woman whose voice sounded firm and decisions were made reasonably. I bought a luxury house in the best area of the city, modern, spacious, with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the horizon, behind which the sun rose every morning, as if congratulating me on who I had become. My car is an elegant Mercedes of the latest model, black as an evening dress, with a leather interior and a soft dashboard light. There were more zeros in my bank account than I could ever have imagined when I was wiping tables and carrying plates, feeling invisible. The only thing that hasn't changed is my relationship with my family. 0 contacts. Almost a decade of silence. They became as much strangers to me as the people I met on the street, except that they at least sometimes smiled. Therefore, when that letter arrived at my old email address, the one that I still kept active only because of some old business contacts, I was genuinely shocked. Family reunion. In Michelle's house. It was the right decision to invite me, I thought bitterly, sitting in my home office, staring at the letter as if it were a mystery that I had to solve. I wondered why I was even thinking of going. Do I want recognition? Reconciliation? Revenge? Perhaps it was a mix of all three. Or maybe I just wanted to see what I had left behind to confirm that yes, I had made the right choice. The day of the meeting came, and spring was perfect, warm, gentle, with a light wind that gently ruffled your hair and reminded you that the world continues to live, no matter where you go. I stood in front of the closet, wondering what to wear. I didn't want to seem like someone who came to show off, no flashy image of a successful businesswoman, nothing provocative that screamed, "Look what I've become." I chose a restrained but immaculate outfit, dark jeans, a silk blouse and a cashmere cardigan. The only concession to luxury was my watch, which was elegant and thin, but it cost more than Michelle probably earned in 2 months. I looked at my reflection in the mirror, and I had to stop for a moment to realize how much I had changed over the past 10 years, how far I had gone from that shy, unhappy girl who left her parents' house all alone, clutching 3 cardboard boxes with her modest belongings and bitterness in her heart, which seemed permanent then. I was 30, and I no longer carried traces of that pain on me. My hair was styled in a smooth, elegant bob that emphasized the line of my cheekbones and emphasized confidence in my posture. My shoulders no longer slouched under the weight of insecurity. My eyes were clear, focused, learned to look straight and without fear, and I stopped being what could be called an offended child. I was an adult woman who knew her own worth. Instead of driving my Mercedes, I called a taxi, another conscious decision, as if I wanted to ease the possible tension without showing off my success too much, to arrive as an ordinary guest, and not as a person who returned to impress, to show off, as one might think. The trip to Michelle's neighborhood took about 30 minutes, enough time for dozens of possible conversations to play out in my head, hundreds of possible lines with which I could respond to barbs, jabs, and indifference, but the closer we got to the goal, the more I felt that I didn't want conflicts at all. That I didn't come for the truth or for revenge. I just wanted to be there, to be present, to be myself, without playing any of the roles that they always felt comfortable putting on me. Michelle's house turned out to be a typical suburban two-story structure, with peeling paint on wooden railings, a standard terrace and a modest plot where a flower bed with early tulips was fading. It wasn't in the most prestigious area, and I knew without much vanity that my own house would have looked much more impressive, but I pushed that thought away. I wasn't here to compare or review other people's achievements. I rang the doorbell, and almost immediately I heard the hum of voices, laughter, and the clink of dishes from inside, the same cacophony that always accompanied family gatherings and which I once hated to the point of nausea. A moment later, the door opened, and my mother appeared on the threshold, in an apron, with a serving spoon in her hand, with a steamed face and the look of a woman who was tired to death, but trying to maintain dignity. She stared at me for almost 5 seconds, not recognizing me, as if she expected to see someone else entirely, perhaps the waitress with the disheveled ponytail and washed-out uniform, in which, as it seemed to her, I remained forever. "Nicolette, is that you?" She finally exhaled, and I smiled tightly. "Hi, Mom." "Oh my God, look at you," she murmured, and there was real surprise in her voice, and maybe even shock. Did they really think that I would remain broken, trapped in the version of myself that they had once rejected? Come in, it's all here," she said, stepping aside. I crossed the threshold, and it was as if I had entered the past. The smells of fried meat, the sound of voices mixed with children's screams and the clink of glasses, the walls decorated with artificial garlands and old-fashioned photographs, all this instantly brought back memories of those days when I, a 15-year-old, was looking for a secluded corner to escape from the hustle and comments. The living room and dining room were full of people, aunts, uncles, cousins with their families, children running between their legs, creating a sense of disorder, which for some reason has always been considered a sign of a spiritual atmosphere here. My father, grizzled and slightly bent, was talking to Uncle Pino by the fireplace. Michel, as always, was the center of attention. He sat surrounded by relatives, waved a beer, and told another funny story, which made everyone laugh together. When I entered, the conversation stopped, as if someone had pulled the plug out of the socket, and a short but dense silence reigned in the room. All heads turned in my direction, eyes widened. "Is this little Micolette?" Aunt Linda exhaled with a theatrical intonation, as if commenting on the appearance of a long, missing actress. "She looks different," someone muttered from the side. I nodded politely to everyone, but I didn't hurry up or greet anyone. I gave them the opportunity to come up to me if they wanted to, and stood there, feeling every tense movement, every look. My cousin Bella, who, like me, was already over 30, leaned over to her husband and whispered something. I caught only fragments: a waitress and a narcissist. I pretended not to hear, but inside I smiled cautiously, not because it was pleasant, but because it became clear that despite all my successes, they still saw me as someone I could no longer be. "Nicolette is here," my mother announced loudly, although there was no need to. Everyone already knew, everyone had seen. "Isn't that wonderful? The whole family is back together." My father came up to me, awkwardly hugged me from the side, as one hugs people with whom one has not talked for a long time, and said, "It's good to see you, baby. It's been too long." "Yes, that's how it was," I replied calmly, without reminding him that the phone works both ways. Michel finally paid attention to me and sauntered over, not losing the aura of attention around him, as if even this meeting was supposed to be about him. "Well," he said, looking me up and down with exaggerated courtesy. "Unless it's my little sister who finally decided that the family is good enough for her again." "Hi, Michel," I said cautiously. "Congratulations on the house." He seemed a little taken aback by my calmness, but he quickly recovered. "Thank you. This is just an initial house, you know. I plan to renovate it in a year or two, when the business really takes off." We moved into the dining room, a room with a long table covered with mismatched plates, forks, wine and jugs and dishes covered with aluminum foil. Michel, of course, took a seat at the head of the table, with his parents on either side, and I was directed to the very edge, next to my second cousin, whose face I vaguely remembered from old photographs, and opposite a noisy child who, without paying attention to anyone, was busily kicking a table leg. The meal began, as expected, with toasts. Glasses were raised one after another, and almost every one of them was addressed to Michel, who sat at the head of the table, like a crowned heir, whose fate was predetermined, and greatness was indisputable. My father stood up first and casually clinked glasses with his closest relatives, saying loudly, "To my son, who has always made us proud, from school successes to the successful businessman he has become today. Michel has never disappointed us." Everyone applauded approvingly. Someone even banged on the table with his fist, expressing the delight that seemed to hover in the air, enveloping Michel's figure with the radiance of infallibility. My mother wasted no time standing right behind him, holding onto her glass with such seriousness, as if she was about to say an oath. "Michel has always been special. His auto parts business is booming, and now this beautiful house. We couldn't be more proud." I watched her like an actress on stage, whose monologue sounded too learned, too rehearsed to be authentic. The applause that rang out again at the end of her speech was more magnificent than before. Uncle Pino did not keep himself waiting, standing up and loudly reminding, "I remember when Michel was still a boy. Even then he showed those leadership qualities that made him what he is today. He really does honor to our family." The toasts continued, each one more enthusiastic, theatrical, with artfully seasoned memories and loud compliments, until the praises began to resemble a rite aimed at maintaining the status quo, where Michel, regardless of reality, will always be the center of the universe. He absorbed these words like a sponge. His chest seemed to grow wider with each new admiring remark, with each praise uttered with a sigh. At some point, he finally remembered that I was at the table, his younger sister, the one no one had mentioned before. He looked at me across the table, with a slight grin in which there was nothing warm. And you, Nicoletta, do you want to say something? All eyes immediately turned to me, like a spotlight in the darkness of the stage. I carefully put my fork on the edge of my plate, intending to just say congratulations on duty, but before I could open my mouth, he interrupted. Are you still waiting tables, sister, or have you already been promoted to dishwasher? There was a booming laugh from around the table. I distinctly heard Aunt Linda giggle. Imagine, at her age, and still working as a waitress. She whispered it to Uncle Pino, but, as expected, loud enough for everyone to hear. 10 years ago, I would have blushed up to my ears. Perhaps I would have got up from the table and, apologizing, ran out, holding back tears, because then all I felt was vulnerability and shame. But not today. Today I laughed, sincerely, loudly, so that silence hung in the room. What's so funny? My mother asked, confused. I looked at her and, still smiling, replied, it's funny that after 10 years of separation, none of you, not a single person at this table, knows anything about my life, nothing at all, but at the same time you feel quite comfortable making loud and, I apologize, erroneous assumptions about it. The table froze. I reached into my purse, took out a business card with an elegant embossed Bella's Restaurant Group logo in the corner, and handed it to my second cousin, who was sitting next to me. Give this to Michelle, please. And if you're interested, you can take a look on the way. The card began to move slowly in a circle, from one hand to the other, and I saw how everyone who looked at it first frowned, then widened their eyes, and finally fixed a new, appraising gaze on me. Finally, the card reached Michelle himself, and he looked down and read it aloud. Nicoletta Hamilton, co-owner and CEO of Bella's Restaurant Group. His voice was muffled, as if the words were not coming through his throat. He looked up at me. What does that mean? My father leaned across the table to make out the inscription. Are you the owner of the restaurant? My mother, stunned, said, do you control it? I nodded and answered calmly, I'm a co-owner. I own 30% of the company. She started as a waitress, then became a manager, then a business partner. We now have 12 restaurants across the state, and next year we will reach the national level. We are regularly published in industry publications. The silence in the room was thick, tense, almost awkward. Michelle looked at me as if I had grown a second head. My house is about twice as big as this one, I added casually and returned to my salad, deliberately indicating that the conversation was over for me. My parents looked at each other, as if for the first time they saw something in me that went beyond the usual image. My mother, as if someone had turned on the light in her head, suddenly lit up with a beaming smile. Nicolette, why didn't you tell us about your successes? We are so proud of you. I chewed slowly, then took a napkin, dabbed my lips, and calmly replied, you could have asked. At any time in the last 10 years. But you didn't do it. The table froze again after my statement. My mother's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. Now we know, don't we? And we're excited. Isn't that right? All the relatives who had shamelessly mocked me a few minutes earlier, as if enjoying their supposed superiority, suddenly, as if on cue, began to go out of their way to show a keen interest in my life. Their questions rained down one after another like hail, breaking the previous coldness and assumed importance. Tell us about your restaurants, Nicolette, Aunt Linda exclaimed, leaning across the table with insincere curiosity. How many employees do you have? Uncle Pino added, eagerly listening to every word. Are you participating in one of those fancy cooking shows? Bella interjected, her face unable to hide her slight envy. Michelle, meanwhile, sat at the head of the table, sullen and silent, the forgotten center of attention, who had recently been basking in applause and admiration, but now found himself pushed to the sidelines. My father, looking from Michelle's face to me and back again, seemed like a man who was desperately trying to reconcile in his mind the image of a successful, confident woman in front of him with that daughter whom he had written off without hesitation many years ago, considering her a loser doomed to mediocrity. I answered politely but briefly, not wanting to go into the details of my life in front of those who deserved my respect much less than random passers-by on the street. After about 15 minutes of this new, awkward communication dynamic, which looked more like a strange farce than a real reunion, I looked at my watch and apologized. It's time for me to go. I have an early appointment tomorrow. My mother protested with exaggerated warmth. But you just came, Nicolette. We have so much to catch up on. I nodded, allowing myself a barely perceptible smile. Yes, 10 years is a long time. But I don't think we can do it in one evening. While I was packing my purse, my parents hurried after me to the door, followed by several relatives, who seemed to need to see me off now. Michel remained sitting in his seat, staring at my card, still holding it in his hand, like some kind of magical amulet that promised to bring back a fleeting sense of his own greatness. It was wonderful to see you, Nicolette, my mother said, her voice suddenly warm and affectionate, as if she were trying to erase years of indifference with just an intonation chord. We've missed you so much, she added, her eyes glittering too deliberately. I stopped on the threshold, turned around and looked at her with a steady, calm gaze. I asked, not raising my voice. She blinked, stunned, clearly not expecting such an answer. Of course we are. You're our daughter, she added hurriedly, as if afraid that I might leave again, and this time for good. It's interesting, I said, feeling a strange feeling of bitter satisfaction rise inside me, because when I called you that Christmas, asking if I could come to a family party, you told me that there was no place for me there. Her face went blank for a moment, then she tried to look embarrassed. It was a misunderstanding. I interrupted her coldly. I asked, or do you just suddenly want a relationship now that you know I'm successful? Nicolette, this is unfair, my father intervened, his voice reproachful, as if I were committing treason. No, I replied calmly, it's not fair, it's what's been happening all these years. I walked out the door without turning around, hearing my mother calling me in desperation behind me. We want to fix everything, Nicolette. We want to be a family again. But I didn't answer. I got into a taxi waiting for me, firmly asking the driver to take me home to my real home, to the life I had built myself, without their participation, without their approval. When I entered my apartment, which was spacious, bright, and smelled of fresh flowers and coffee, I kicked off my shoes at the door, walked over to the couch, and laughed, a real, loud, liberating laugh that involuntarily brought tears to my eyes. I laughed, remembering the expressions on their faces as my business card slowly circled the table: shock, disbelief, stunned, and finally, that unmistakable, instinctive movement to try to claim me again when they realized that I was successful, important, and worthy. The next morning, I woke up to the vibration of my phone, 17 text messages and 5 missed calls. 3 from my mother, 4 from my father, 2 from Michelle, and the rest from aunts, uncles, and cousins who hadn't bothered to think about me once in 10 years. I skimmed through them, not reading the apologies, invitations, attempts to explain the past, then put the phone on the bedside table and went about my business. This pattern continued for almost a week. My phone was constantly flashing with new notifications, which showed the diligence, obsequiousness, and sometimes the obvious confusion of those who finally realized that the world in which Nicoletta was a minor character had long ceased to exist. I ignored most of the messages, focusing on work. We were just in difficult negotiations to open 3 new restaurants in neighboring states, a project that required all my attention, all my energy. On the 6th day, in a rare moment of silence, when I was sitting by the window reading financial reports, the phone rang again. I looked at the screen and, not quite sure why, I answered. It was my mother. Nicolette, she exclaimed as soon as I picked up the phone, her voice cracking with emotion. Finally. We've been trying to contact you for so long. Why don't you come over for dinner this Sunday? Just you, me, your father, and Michelle. Just a chance to reconnect, just to talk, to start all over again. I sighed, feeling the fatigue accumulated over all these days drain into my voice. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, choosing my words carefully. But we're a family, she insisted, and there was a sincere, desperate plea in her voice. We love you, Nicolette, we've always loved you. If you loved me, I said slowly, carefully choosing my intonation, trying not to make a single word sound like an accusation, but each one like the truth that had been kept inside for too long, why didn't you call me at least once in 10 years? Why didn't you ever ask me how I was doing, or if I needed help, support, or basic human involvement? Why did you tell me that no one needed me when I called that Christmas morning hoping for at least a little warmth? There was a pause on the line, thick, awkward, almost creepy, as if someone on the other end was trying to find the right words in a room full of forgotten junk. And then her voice, trembling at first, then gradually gaining momentum, tore off its former mask of an affectionate mother. How can you be so ungrateful? She almost screamed, breaking down. After all we've done for you. I felt my lips curl into a barely perceptible smile, and I answered calmly, without raising my voice. What exactly did you do for me? You didn't pay for my education, you didn't support my career, you didn't even bother to check if I was alive. Yes, you raised me, you fed me, clothed me, and one day, as soon as I reached adulthood, you decided that I was no longer worth your time. And now that you've seen my success, you suddenly decide that I have value again. But it's too late. I hung up the phone before she could respond, and to my surprise, I felt no pain, no regret, no anxiety, just a strange, deep, barely perceptible calm, as if an old, hardened armor that I had been wearing for too long had been removed from me. Michel was next, as expected. His messages began to come more frequently, longer, more insistent, and soon culminated in an extensive text asking for a business loan to expand his auto parts store. He asked for $50,000, promising to return every last cent, with interest, as between real partners. I didn't answer right away. I waited until he sent another short message. Did you get my previous one? And then, feeling neither anger nor resentment, I just wrote one word, no. Then I blocked his number, as easily as I had once left my parents' house, knowing that there was no point in continuing a dialogue in which everything had been said without words for a long time. 2 weeks have passed since that evening, and, yielding to a sudden burst of curiosity, I opened social media and went to Michel's page. There was a long post written in the style of Revelations in front of the public, with subtle hints and passive aggression, expertly disguised as disappointment. Sometimes family members forget where they come from. Sometimes success gets so high that people forget who they really are, he wrote. It's a pity when they see in you only someone who can give something, and reject you if you ask. Is it really that hard to remain human? The comments section turned out to be predictably crowded. Sympathetic relatives, the very ones who hadn't thought about me or him until recently, suddenly rallied in a circle of support, like bees around a hive. They wrote that he was the soul of the family, had always been a real man, that I was ungrateful, selfish, and that money was no substitute for a heart. It should have hurt me, it should have provoked anger or at least a pang of resentment, but instead I laughed, really, quietly, a little hoarsely, like those who suddenly realized that all the masks had long since slipped off. They haven't changed. The same judgmental, narrow-minded, blind to other people's growth as they always were. The only thing that's changed is me. Now I could see it clearly, without that pressing need for their approval, without the desire to be accepted, without the hunger for recognition that once made me vulnerable. I closed the browser, put down my laptop, and noticed a business proposal lying on the table. Isabella and I discussed the possibility of opening a culinary school at our flagship restaurant, an idea that not only promised profit, but also carried a sense of mission, to share knowledge, educate a new generation of chefs, managers, and restaurateurs, and thereby repay the debt to the society that gave us a chance when the family turned away. I looked at the numbers, studied the forecasts, and, with each point, I felt a calm, even, warm satisfaction spreading in my chest. My life was not perfect, but it was mine, suffered, built by myself, step by step, without the support of those who were supposed to be my support, and it was in this as her strength. The next day, on my way to a business meeting, I went into the office, and my assistant, a young, attentive guy named Liam approached me with slight hesitation and said, "Your mom called 3 times. Do you want me to keep receiving messages or?" I thought for a moment, looking out the window at the shining morning sun, and then calmly replied, "Block her number. And all the others related to my family. I'm focused on the future, not the past." He nodded, without asking questions, and walked away, and I, straightening my shoulders a little, entered the meeting room, feeling lighter than I had ever felt in recent years. The family reunion, no matter how unexpected and ridiculous it was, gave me not reconciliation, not a new beginning, but something more important: resolution. I no longer had to ask questions, to be tormented by doubts, to wonder if it was possible to fix everything. I no longer had to hope that one day they would understand, change, fall in love. They showed me who they are, without embellishment, without masks, and I showed myself who I am now, a woman who has become strong enough to recognize toxicity, brave enough to set boundaries, and wise enough to know when to close the door. Forever. Write a comment on what you think about this story and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like it. See you soon.